Thank you, Tracy, and good morning, everyone, and appreciate that you've all taken some time to join us this morning. Digital means many different things to very many different people, and we're not going to do justice to that as an entire topic today because it just would take too long. So we're going to focus in on one small angle, but I just wanted to cover off some principles before we then focus in on where Jeremy is going to focus this morning. And I think we can all have had different experiences over recent months about what a lack of digital can mean, because people have been very difficult to get hold of. Sending paper around during the recent months has proven to be very, very difficult. And it's highlighted, I would imagine, to each of you, either where your processes are very strong and very good, or actually where there's some room for improvement, because the lack of digital has caused issues and taken time, and efficiencies have probably in certain cases just not been there really. So what I wanted to cover was some concepts, and I think the slide doesn't do it justice, but to me, being digital means that you need to put customers and suppliers right in the center of everything you do, and ask yourself some very simple questions such as, how do we improve service? Either the service we receive or the service we deliver. How can that be better? In terms of staff, how can our staff become more productive? We need to take away the things that are not good for humans. Repetitive tasks are not great things for humans to do, because if we're not challenged, we make mistakes. If we're asked to do these repetitive things continually, we become bored and we become inactive and non-productive. So it's important that we allow people to focus on the things that they're good at, which are thinking, discussing and communicating with their peers, their colleagues, their suppliers, their customers, and allow them to generate creativity, allow them to look at how things can be improved and focus in on that essential service and that essential question I asked at the start of how do we improve service we receive or we deliver. So it's vital that we strip things out like paper. Paper is the biggest issue to us all. And we're going to talk about AP today. And I'm sure some people on there will be saying, my AP department works perfectly well. I've got, for example, 12 people. They're brilliant at receiving emails, printing them out, writing on them, sending them around the building, reprinting them when someone's lost them, eventually getting them back, keying them back into the system, and then getting them paid. Meanwhile, the supplier is sitting there thinking, I wonder if I'm ever going to get paid for that. I delivered it really quickly this time. So we need to be effective. We need to look at driving up speed and quality. One does not compromise the other. People often think the faster you get, the worse the quality gets. No, it doesn't. You can drive them both to be efficient at the same pace, and you can improve speed and quality together. They are intrinsically linked in that respect. And that, as a result, will drive down cost. Now, some of it will be non-cashable, and some of it will be cashable. But you will drive down the costs by driving up efficiency and driving up quality at the same time. And I think when I've put AI and RPA, I'm not saying you should go out and buy an RPA solution or an AI solution. What I'm really saying here is, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later, well, Jeremy is specifically, look at applications that have embedded elements of AI and RPA, or machine learning, whichever terminology you want to use, that allow you to drive that speed and efficiency and quality, allow you to free up your people. And at the end of the day, you will become agile and you will become smart. But the key here is to make sure that whilst you're improving all of these things, your applications are allowed to be mobile. Today we're talking about AP, so it's all very well getting invoices in quickly, ready to be paid, but if there's approvals needed, make sure you've got mobile applications that allow your staff, wherever they are, whatever hours they're currently working, whatever their time pressures are, to very quickly, very easily access the relevant data. The mobile applications can tell them when that data is there. They don't have to go and look for it. They don't have to log in. They don't have to dial in through VPNs and all sorts of other things. It'll tell them it needs their attention. It can be agile enough to quickly focus them in on where they need to be. They can approve things, they can raise things, they can ask for things. All gets done quickly and easily. And you suddenly see people being used more effectively. So now I'm spending less time on systems and more time with people, which is what this is all about. People are better when they work with people, not when they work with systems. Let the systems do all the laborious work, do all the repetitive work in an intelligent, fast manner in the background, and let people talk to each other to get the strategic work done that doesn't always get done because things get in the way. And really, that's where I wanted to finish this, to let us actually focus on the purpose of today. If there are any questions, either ask them as we go along. I think Jeremy would be happy with that as well, or use the chat facility that Tracy and Sarah will monitor. And Jeremy, I'll be happy to hand over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. And yeah, good morning, everybody. And I think for me, the purpose of this session is very much for it to be a workshop. So there's some content that we'll talk through, but the reason, if you like, for setting up the workshop was to take the digital strategy that Mark's been talking about there, and we recognise that is driving change. But I think what happens is we get involved in an awful lot of conversations around enabling desired outcomes for businesses, but also we get involved in the very specific detail of at a departmental level. So in this case, we're talking about AP and invoice processing, credit note processing, and so on. I thought it'd be useful to have a session where we could share some of the ideas, some of the challenges, some of the pain points that we come across to see if those resonate with others, and also an opportunity to use this as a forum, probably through the chat because of the number of people that are on the call, but for you to maybe put your own ideas in, to challenge some of the things that Mark and I are talking about maybe. If you've got some good ideas as to how things have been worked around, again, this could be a very good forum to share some of those ideas as well. But I think for the purposes of the presentation, and just using Mark's intro there as a backdrop, I think, having been involved in digital projects for about 20 years now at an ERP level, we've been looking at transformation projects, we've been looking at digital drivers, we've been looking at, how we can improve the things that Mark's talking about there, the accuracy, the speed of processing, how we can lower costs and so on. And that driver has always been there. And what we're seeing, I think, is that people have invested time and money into a project. Sometimes they have seen a level of positive result that they're looking to now extend beyond, and other times people have maybe failed to see some of those benefits materialize. So again, they keep looking for a different way to find things. But I think automation features very heavily, and there's an awful lot of discussion about intelligent automation, about what RPA is going to be delivering over sort of the coming years, decades, and so on. And I think what we do recognise is that automation for all businesses features very heavily within a strategy, whether that be a corporate strategy or whether that be much more operational, how we're going to be approaching particular tasks, projects, and so on. Quite often what I have found though is that even though there's huge investment in transformational and digital projects, actually when you start looking at the very specific processes within a department, actually what you're left with is some very manual processes that still have to be done because it requires skill set, it requires experience of staff to actually be able to process something and to be able to fully automate the particular process. And ultimately I think it's creating new challenges. It's either, as Mark said, sometimes it focuses the pain point to a point where actually something has to be done to fix it, but quite often actually by introducing more analytics and by introducing faster process, it can actually introduce additional challenges. And as I say, this was an opportunity for me to, I think, articulate some of those challenges, but I'm definitely hoping that this is going to be quite an interactive session. So if anybody has any questions, please put them into the chat and we'll address them as we go. But just using that as a backdrop, and again, I think COVID has brought around its own business continuity challenges. People are looking at resilience. They're looking at how we could potentially process very quickly by keeping people off site and so on. But actually, if you step back a little bit from COVID and a pandemic, actually people are still looking at organizational challenges. They're looking at how can we minimize risk. People are still looking at how can you increase compliance, how can you meet legislation that's changing all the time, how can we drive the cost reductions and so on that are needed, but at the same time bearing in mind the operational challenges that come with this. So it could be as simple as, how do we process something but get a little bit more data out to feed the analytics system? How do we optimize productivity? And I think a really growing part at the moment is that the supply chain effectiveness and the experience that you have with your supply chain is also a key thing. And that could be as simple as, making sure that you can pay on time, making sure that you can get your goods on time, getting better visibility along the way, discussing early settlement discounts, and so on. So we'll hone in on some of these specifically a little bit more. But to start with, I thought I'd just, again, using it as a bit of a backdrop to maybe see, again, please feel free to put in the chat, what you're maybe using at the moment, if you've used anything to automate a particular process with an AP. But I thought I'd start off by saying, some of the key things that we find as a business. And many organizations have invested, as I say, to some degree in automating AP. Often that'll be down to EDI, so electronic data interchange, where you'll have maybe a very large sender. So it could be that it's coming through from another system, or it could be that you have one particular supplier that you do significant volume of business with, and you've actually invested time, money, technical, operational, and so on to actually create a link that provides information from their system directly into yours, and maybe vice versa. So obviously, that's a very streamlined process, and we're fully supportive of that. I think it's a really good way to do it, but it's not suited to everybody. It does require investment of time and money from both businesses in order for EDI to be established, but also managed and maintained moving forward. So I think EDI is a key one for an awful lot of organizations, but it usually only accounts for a small percentage of the business that people do. And because of that, people have, again, started looking at alternative ways. So it could be using a supplier portal where you ask your suppliers to come on board, to join you, if you like, in a portal, to log in, to enter their details, to enter their invoices, which would then feed through into your system. Really good way of automating, but the trouble is there's big barriers there. And a lot of suppliers have pushed back because they don't want to be logging into numerous other systems to re-raise an invoice that they've already created within their own ERP or finance system. So again, I don't think portals, and in the same context, PO flip or purchase order flip has really taken off. Again, asking the supplier to log into an additional system to take on extra workload to streamline the process within AP, it just hasn't really materialized. So we'll talk about OCR, which has been long established. It's been around for decades, and it's been used in a business context for certainly the last sort of 50, 60 years. But within AP, certainly in the last 30 years, it's really taken off. Although it's probably being challenged now as to is it the most suitable way to bring in data into a finance system with the move to digital, with the move of things like intelligent automation. OCR still features very heavily out there, and I'd be surprised if most of the people on the call haven't invested or used in OCR at some point. There are challenges that go with OCR, and I think we'll talk a little bit more detail about some of the issues that people have had or that have talked to us about. But typically there'll be accuracy of data. It might be that it can't extract information at the right level. So maybe you're after line level information, but it can only do header level data, for example. It might be that actually the accuracy is such that you have to maintain a level of staff there that you had before just to go through and correct or complete. So I think OCR is good. There are definitely benefits to it, but the challenges that we hear about quite often are what drives people to attend things like this workshop here, to look at new ways of working. So the two key things left: manual keying. Obviously, ultimately, I think that's what a lot of people have relied on, whether it be outsourcing or whether you maintain a level of staff within the organization. But people ultimately will have a team, either a shared service, a shared function, or even just a room where people are processing invoices. And lastly, that leads us on to robotic process automation and AI. And what I think we've seen within this world here is that machine learning, RPA, and AI, it's been around for 5 or 6 years now, is definitely extending the capabilities as to the type of project it can be involved in. A lot of clients have invested time and money into it, some with mixed success. And I think a lot of people have found that actually if you invest in RPA, it still relies on a service like OCR underneath it, which maybe there was another webinar we were involved in and they said, robots don't make mistakes, data does. So the idea being is that if you feed the RPA system with poor quality data, actually you're not going to get the required and desired outcome at the other side. And, a lot of these technologies, the new technologies, take time. They take technical expertise. It costs money and people to actually set them up. And ultimately, again, machine learning and AI uses pattern recognition, so it's still using something there. So it's going to be a case of probably sort of almost testing it, see how it goes. People will be investing in different RPAs with different solutions, and I don't think that many people will be saying we're going to go just to one particular automation anyway, UiPath, Blue Prism, etc. So they're still looking at different ways that they can fill different gaps, but ultimately there is a skills gap that is preventing the adoption of those technologies prevalently anyway. So just moving through, and I say this isn't going to be a big sort of who are CloudTrade, but just to set the scene as to why we get involved in so many conversations, particularly within the AP processing function. So as an organisation, we've been around for about 10 years now. We've got some fairly big names that use us. So some of the names that you'll see on screen will be using us for just very simple data extraction of invoices, maybe at header level. So they're after invoice number, purchase order number, date, etc. Others will use us for some very complex use cases. So it could be extracting and validating inbound documents. So sales orders, statements, even purchase order processing, PEPL, etc. So we do have quite a varied use case here. And as I say, today we're going to be focusing on AP, but what CloudTrade are is it's about validating and enriching data that is coming into an organization via a digital means. So somebody emails you something, that's a perfect document for us to process. One of the key things that we play on is the what we call our sender network. So when we take on board a new client, quite often we will have a good number of their senders already transacting on the network. So for example, if you're in public sector, or if you're processing sales orders within certain verticals, the chances are that we've got a good number of your senders already there transacting through the system, so we can enable them to work with you incredibly quickly. I'll touch on 100% data accuracy a couple of times because I think it's a really key thing. And whereas if you start looking at OCR, they can talk about up to 80%. If you have a complex document or you want line level, typically that percentage will drop. But where the CloudTrade network scores is it's 100% accurate. It's impossible for us to misread digital data, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The other one that sometimes comes up is PEPL. I probably will touch on it briefly here, but if anybody's interested in more details, then obviously we can go into that. And PEPL is it's a mandate within the UK. It was EU law. It's been transposed over to UK law. And what we're seeing is that more and more people are starting to at least be aware of what PEPL is. And PEPL, if somebody sends you as the public sector body a PEPL invoice, you need to be able to process it and automate it into your system. So it could be as simple as printing it off and decoding everything, going through the XML lines and entering it from there. But the idea being is that as a PEPL access point, CloudTrade of which are one of, then we would be able to automate the receipt of that invoice and then sending it directly into your ERP system ready for processing. So that's all I'm going to touch on in terms of who CloudTrade are. But again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. So just looking at this slide from left to right, what we've found is that there's usually not necessarily one solution that's going to address all of your invoice volumes. So what we typically see is on the left-hand side, invoice volumes. As I say, EDI is still usually used within most organizations and features somewhere with sort of 5 to 20% of the volume typically. This has left a massive gap, which people have used, as I said, OCR and other tech to have a look at, but it leaves this massive middle, as we call it. Now, most of the time, this is the perfect area for CloudTrade. So we'll have some organizations that we do 100% of their documents, others where maybe we only do 80, 90%, but we can fully automate those ones there. So that's the key thing. It's addressing what could be the long tail for most people, but it's the massive middle here. There may still be a place for a third-party OCR or portal system. So again, that would be something that potentially would sit on a site, a client site, for them to operate locally. But more often, people are just looking to provide all of their volumes through a service like CloudTrade in the conversations that we're involved in. Most of the time as well, we'll talk about PDFs, but a PDF, if it has been emailed to you, 90% of the time plus will be a data PDF. And what people don't often realize about a data PDF is that Mark talked about, there's organizations that will receive a PDF, they'll print it off and then scan that. Whereas actually a data PDF contains a data layer within the document. Now, although it's a human readable document, and I've got a couple of examples, if you can highlight the text, then actually we can fully and 100% accurately extract the data. So that's where people, again, look to us for processing those. There's a handful of a very small number of image files that are left. So this might be bits of paper that are sent to you, which you would then scan and send in to us, but most of the time somebody is able to email a document. Every system is usually able to do that now. So I'm going to talk about the specific challenges that we come across in just a second, but just as a way of introduction as to how CloudTrade works, which I think will set the scene for a lot of the topics that we come on to. The way that CloudTrade works is that you will invite your senders to email their document exactly as they do now, usually to a specific email address. Now, when that sender sends that email, it goes into the CloudTrade service. So we will, again, working from left to right here, the sender emails their document in, hits CloudTrade. We will then go through and extract the data. So we'll identify, obviously, we know who it's to because of the email address. We know who it's from because of the document. And then we can work out the document type. So if it's an invoice, if it's an order, if it's a statement, and so on. Once we have extracted the document, and we extract the entire document, we don't just try and look for certain keywords, we don't just look for certain bits of information, we extract everything and interpret that document. The two next stages are, I think, the most important bits, and this is what drives the adoption like nothing else. We then go through and validate these documents. So a lot of the conversations will be about, well, we have a no PO, no pay policy. Sometimes with OCR, it'll pick that up and reject it. Other times it will come through into the back office where we have to actually physically look for that purchase order number. We can introduce rules that are simple as, if the purchase order number is not on that document, and it doesn't have to be in a specific place, it can be on that document, then we will reject it back on behalf of the client. We can go through and say, for example, if it's a VAT document, so there's VAT quoted on the document, but there's no VAT number actually on the invoice to be found, then again, we can have a rule that rejects it back to say, you've quoted VAT, but you haven't included a VAT reference, a VAT registration number, please amend your documents accordingly. So we can go through all of those validation rules that are there. And in terms of the enrichment process, again, I think this is quite a key thing. So if a document comes in, we can do a validation to say, does this purchase order number that's being quoted, as an example, already exist against that particular supplier? If so, is it a valid purchase order? Is there still balance on it? Or do we need to reject it and ask for an updated document? But ultimately, the key thing is we export an accurate document over into your system, and we'll send over both the XML and the original PDF. So it automates it usually within a few minutes from sender to being received in your system, and then obviously the PDF is available for you to view as well. Now we can touch on what is on network and off network a little bit as well, but the key thing is that anything that is on network, so it's where there's a configured relationship between you and a sender, i.e. you've said, we're going to onboard these people, they're going to be sending in invoices, and we in effect write the rules to say this is what we're looking for, then those will be on network. And if a document fails, it comes into CloudTrade for us to have a look at. So we have two operations team, one in Newcastle, one in London, and they will actually get eyes on the document to work out why that rule has failed. So if we couldn't find a purchase order number, for example, maybe the purchase order number is actually there, but they've changed the format, and you might have said that it has to be 8 numbers long and it starts with this for it to feed into a particular system. So we'll go through, if the rule doesn't automatically pick that up, it will then come into CloudTrade. We will then either relax or tighten the rule accordingly so that it can then flow through. If it's an off-network sender, this is where we haven't written the link, if you like, between the organizations. So this would normally be for the very, very small senders. So if somebody's only doing 10 documents a year, 15 documents a year with you, it's probably not always appropriate to put them on network. But as soon as they're doing more than certainly 20 invoices or 20 documents a year, it makes sense from a financial perspective to put them on network. But if they're off network, then those exceptions would be managed in an intervention queue by the client themselves. So there's a few questions coming in. I'll keep my eyes on those. But if there's any specific questions about how CloudTrade works, obviously please feel free to then just put them through the chat, and we can raise them either here or come back to you on an individual workshop as well. I'm going to move on to the AP pain points, and I'm going to check through the questions as well. So I'm going to try and multitask here, which will probably fail miserably. But I think the process that we've got is, we talk to an awful lot of organisations, as I say. They'll raise a number of questions with us. So what you're seeing on screen are some of the most common questions that we see. So please feel free to put more through, but otherwise I'm going to work through a couple of these to give you a feel for, again, hopefully get a bit of interaction going here, but to give you a feel for how other organisations are managing these type of questions. So if we start with the operational side, what we've found usually is that most people that we're talking to have invested in OCR or similar in the past, but they're constantly still having to manually check, because normally the accuracy of the document isn't always necessarily a problem, but actually it hasn't automated the validation of the rules. So for example, it didn't find purchase order number wasn't quoted on there, or maybe the purchase order number had moved, or there was line overrun, etc. So all of these things can knock a template out. So I've got some examples, so I'm just going to try and pull these across here. But so hopefully there's some PDF invoices on screen. Maybe if somebody could just put a thumbs up or something in the chat if you can see a PDF invoice that's on screen. Perfect, excellent, thanks, Mark. So I've got a couple of example documents that we'll work through, and not everybody's interested in getting all of the data off of an inbound document. So it might just be a case of, well, actually you want, obviously this has been redacted, but it might be that you want to check the purchase order number, the date, the invoice number, and so on. Other people will want to go through and say that, well, actually, we want to get all of this line level data off. We need to know the very specific details of what's on the invoice so that we can match it back to the purchase order. There might be a case of, one of the common questions we get is, for example, in this particular invoice, they call it cases, 1, 1, 2, etc. The unit of measure sometimes doesn't always equal what you're ordering or another measurement that you're using internally. So it might be that you have to say, well, actually convert cases into this using this metric and actually give us the equivalent but in our own metric. A couple of interesting things about this particular invoice though is that obviously there's line overrun, so this goes onto a second page. Sometimes that can have a knock-on effect. Things don't always get produced on the invoice particularly clearly. Sometimes there can be overrun, so if you focus in on a particular area, because it's overspilling the line, again, sometimes something like OCR will actually go through and identify maybe that as in this case it wouldn't do, but a 1 or an I or an L or something sitting in the middle there. And then obviously, there could be different VAT rates and so on. Now, depending on the client's needs, we can go through and either pull out just the invoice totals, the VAT totals, or we can go through and dissect all of this data. Now, again, although we can see everything on screen here, what's interesting is that the table would be ignored by the solution that we have. So it would just basically pick up the data, put it into the format that you needed, and then present that over on an XML file. A couple of other invoices that we can go through. Here, again, very simple invoice, this one, but it was one of the things that we needed to do on this particular case for this client was convert this bit here, the period that was quoted on the invoice. They actually wanted that turned into a different format, so rather than it being 01-04- etc. What they wanted us to do was to take that and actually convert the date field. So again, I'll classify that as enrichment, if you like, but the idea being is that we can take something on the document, represent it, but without actually obviously changing the data, but just change the way it's presented, and then pass that over to the system. So that was a key one there. And the last one I'll touch on was, it looks like a very simple document, actually. So we've got, obviously, who the account number, who it's from, the values, etc. And that's all that the organisation wanted to pick up on. However, this is a 20+ page document normally, but when you actually get into the detail of this, okay, there's some individual balances here, but actually what there are is that there's an awful lot more data that's available within this document that people actually weren't weren't able to obtain. So for example, for individual property numbers, they actually wanted to find out, what the water usage was in this case, so what the meters were, what the volumes were, etc., and just actually be able to take that forward. So it's from a data accuracy perspective, they were able to take all of this data and feed it into their analytics system or property system, but only take the financial data into their ERP system. So again, different people need different things from. So I think as I say, different people want different things from data, but we're able to automate that extraction there. So just a couple of invoices that I thought I'd touch on just to sort of set the scene, if you like. So most of the operational pieces we've probably covered off in terms of, line level data. Obviously we can do that. Things like being able to extract multiple documents from a single PDF that gets emailed in. Again, that's not a problem because we use a rules-based system. It's declarative language, if you like, that will go through and identify where a new document starts. So where one ends, where one starts. We don't need to do things like blank pages or identify how many pages are in a page run. I think the biggest document we do is about 1,500 pages long, and there's hundreds and hundreds of invoices within that, and we'll have to go through and split each one out accordingly and send them over as individual files. I think we've touched on in the intro, the barriers for supplier adoption. There is no cost to the supplier, there is no technical change for them, they just have to email their invoice in. So I think in the context of what we're talking about here, there's usually 95+% adoption from suppliers when you ask them. There's no barrier for the adoption. They don't have to use PO Flip, they don't use portals, they just send an email in. The compliance one obviously is much more varied, but from things like enforcing a no PO no pay policy, that's sort of bread and butter for what we do. If the supplier doesn't include something that you have said absolutely has to be on this document, it could be a purchase order number, it could be a contract reference number, it could be a property number, in the context of a water bill, then we will reject it back on your behalf. So we're the front door to your organisation. CIS as well. So a couple of things that come up recently, CIS, not being able to break out the labour and materials, or maybe it's not presented properly on the invoice. Again, that usually involves a manual check being done. And that for me is where things like RPA and AI are still quite limited, because they're still not able to, if you like, action that without some sort of attendance. So they need somebody to still be involved in the process so that they improve it, but they don't fix the problem. And the last one is an interesting one. So manually checking for payment fraud. So a lot of people will invest in either products or services to post payment to actually then go through and actually say, right, well, it looks like this was a fraudulent invoice and we need to try and claw that money back. Because of the checks that we do, we can identify if maybe something like a bank account number has changed, if actually the value is the same on an invoice from a supplier within a certain time frame, although the invoice number might be different. We can write the rules that will put them into a quarantine queue for somebody to have a look at. So because we're completely rules based, really it's up to you to define how it is that you want to work, and then we can write those through. I won't touch on the headcount reductions and so on, but I think, just to say what we do is we do automate a process. So we do provide opportunity to streamline a particular process there. So again, Mark and I can go into further details on that, but what we'd normally find is that the ROI on a project like this is certainly within in year, which is obviously quite key to people at the moment. But I will touch on the bottom one, although this is very topical for now. Hopefully, COVID isn't here to stay for too much longer, but I have a fear that it is for a little while longer. What people are trying to do is to not have people coming into an organisation. So in this case, it was a trust that was still having to ask their finance staff to come into an organisation where COVID levels were relatively high, and they didn't feel it was necessarily a safe use of staff time. So they were trying to set things up remotely as quickly as possible. But actually, the reality is that they didn't have a way to automate that service quickly enough. Typically, we can be up and running in about 4 to 6 weeks. If it's a more complex project, it will take a bit longer, but certainly we're talking weeks or small number of months, not transformation all over a year. So there's a few fixes there. So I'm just conscious that there's actually a lot of chat coming through as well, some private and some open to everybody. So I'll probably just pick up on a couple of the questions. But Mark, while I'm just reading this, and multitasking, as you know, isn't one of my strengths, is there anything that you want to add in terms of challenges that you've come across within Embridge? I'll pick up on some of the questions as you're maybe just picking up on a couple there.
Yeah, I think that the main challenge really is it's that automation of the process, because it's not just getting the invoice in. Once the invoice comes in, you automatically, we've proven by CXML that getting the invoice into Unit 4 ERP is very, very straightforward. You've then got the three-way matching. So only those invoices that need approval will actually then be sent via workflow. If everything matches, it's automatically approved and sits on the ledger. So it's not just streamlining getting the invoices in. It also has an effect further down the line, because all the good stuff that you've then got in the ERP kicks in. So you can have invoices being paid far quicker. You can have exceptions being routed for approval far quicker. So the entire end-to-end process within AP becomes much quicker, much slicker. Again, as I said in my introduction, only things that you need to know about are then flagged to people. So exceptions where workflow is needed. So the whole thing is just a much smoother process. And it impacts then on relationships, because suppliers then see you as a very proactive, very concerned, very sort of caring kind of customer to them. So they look after you better. So when you then go into those negotiations around the contract, you know, they will listen to you because you've been one of the people that's looked after them as well. And it really does change the dynamic of a relationship between you and your suppliers as well, which I think is a benefit very few people necessarily think about, but actually can be quite a key component in all of this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a really, really good point, actually. And the repeat business, if you like, that comes through CloudTrade, people actually find more and more use cases. So if something like AP was taken as the first project, you know, as I say, typically, in fact, one of the questions is how long does it take to set up? So, you know, if you were to say 8 to 12 weeks is a very, very comfortable time frame from start to full live with everything. But I think you're right. Because of that, people start to look at extended use cases. So invoices day one, you know, but actually bringing statements in might be something else to think about further down the line as well. And people start looking at different use cases there.
Yeah, and I know you're looking at sales orders as well at the moment, aren't you?
Yeah, we do. For some organisations, we process, tens and tens of thousands of sales orders every month. Again, the reason being is that, you know, we can accurately and incredibly quickly extract the document. So if somebody has a sort of a 100-line sales order that comes in, instead of having to key that, and again, OCR just doesn't work at line level on something like this because it's critical data. Again, within a few minutes, that's processed and available in the order processing system, and then goods are dispatched. So yeah. So it's a good point, Mark. So I'm just going to pick through a couple of the questions here. Question about where we are hosted geographically. So CloudTrade uses Microsoft Azure. So again, we can set up in the region that you need. And in terms of GDPR concerns, again, we can obviously discuss full details about, you know, the way that the data is processed and handled, etc. As a data processor, that we don't see anything. It's all hosted into Azure. It does come through to one of our operators. But we're only obviously looking for the data items that you've asked us to pick out. So what else we got? So PDFs, in terms of uploading PDFs into Business World, there's no need to convert them to a different format. If you want the PDF, we can do that. However, if you would prefer to have a different output, again, that's up to you. We can take a PDF in, we can convert it, or we can provide you with an XML file, typically CXML, and then that would be made available to Aggresso. But after that, if you wanted a TIFF image sent over, or if you wanted it rendered in a different way, again, we can do that without any problem at all. So yeah, again, there's something else here about Business World and PDF. So as most of the time, and if you look at, I say lesser ERP systems, right? But if you're looking at different systems, so whether it be, you know, a Sage, a Xero, an Oracle, an SAP, the standard default is to output a PDF document. And again, in this day and age, it's when you hear about stories about people printing off a document to either key it or to scan it, or even OCR it from a digital source. Again, it's a mixed bag, and 95+% of the documents that we see are application generated PDFs. Now there was another question actually, which was you know, what constitutes an application generation document. So it doesn't have to be a PDF. It could be a Word document. It could be an Excel spreadsheet. It can be, you know, quite an unstructured document in terms of the way it's presented. It doesn't have to be a fixed format, because what we're not looking for is a fixed position to identify the data. What we're actually doing is we're writing rules that says, go through the document, we extract everything, go through the lines of the document. When you find this, you know, anchor point, if you like, it could be a piece of text, it could be a mark, it could be something, then go into the line and look for this next piece of information. If you don't find it, keep going down through the document. So there's obviously rules that we can write to say how far into a document we go, but, you know, start top of the document, bottom of the document, left or right, and so on. So it's a pretty complex system in terms of the way it's written underneath. It does use a subset of AI as a language, but actually the way that it's deployed is incredibly simple, and it's just a rules-based system, which is unique. So there's a patent that protects, you know, how we've applied this technology. And as I say, it's growing and growing in the market, which is good. So once the invoices are imported, do you see the image in Unit 4? Yes. Oh, sorry, Mark. That's yeah, absolutely. So yeah, once the invoice has gone over, that'll be just it's exactly the same as if you had gone through your existing route, whether it be OCR'd or manually entered. So we will make the document available to you. It's entirely up to you then what you do. We're not forcing you to pay an invoice. You know, we're not forcing you to do anything with it. It's available accurately and quickly within Aggresso, and then it's completely up to you as to how you want to process it from there. I'm just trying to think, I've probably missed quite a few questions here, so I'm just going to skim back through. So what happens if my customers or suppliers can't send an application generated document? Okay, so if you've got somebody that is genuinely only sending a very small number of documents, and maybe they're only able to output an image file, that's actually not a problem. But what we'll do is we can still, I'm not backtracking there, but we actually use OCR to do a full extract of the document. Now OCR obviously isn't 100% accurate, so we can't guarantee the accuracy of an image file, particularly if it's a poor quality one. But the key thing about the OCR is that actually the OCR is only a means, if you like, to get the data. The clever bit about what we do is always about the validation, the enrichment, and the way that we extract the information. So actually, if somebody sends in an image file, we'll still apply all of your business rules to it. You know, so again, exactly the same. If it's no purchase order quoted on it, we will reject it back to the sender, or we can put it into a queue for you to have a look at as well. So although it is definitely a minority document type now, you know, we can still process them if people want us to take everything.
Thanks, Jeremy. I think that's all the questions on the chat at this moment in time. So if you've got any further questions, please quickly pop them into the chat function there.
And the other thing I was going to say, Tracy, actually, so I think you'll probably be touching on this as well, is that this style of workshop is good. Hopefully it gets across, you know, some of the discussion points. Hopefully it gets across, you know, some of the pain points that other organizations are feeling, which maybe resonate a little bit. But I think it's a lot easier sometimes to go into detail on a one-to-one as well. So we're more than happy to run like an AP workshop with yourselves, actually using your data, have a look at the specific requirements that you have around data validation, etc. So again, if you've got any questions around that, or you're looking to set up something that's a bit more involved, then Mark or I'll be able to obviously take that detail as well.
Thanks, Jeremy. I'm not seeing any further questions unless they have come through to you guys privately. I'll give it a second just to see if anybody else has anything further.
No, there was a couple that came through to me, but I think we've clicked those off. Yeah.
Excellent. I mean, we've had a really good turnout today. Would you pop in the chat that we've covered off the areas that you wanted to see as part of this workshop? Is there anything else that we've missed out on that you feel that you'd just like to cover, even if it's not a specific question? If you could just pop in the chat if you feel that we've covered off your areas of interest. Everybody's gone a little bit shy.
So, I mean, Tracy, we can always, I mean, if there are specific things, obviously Mark's details are there. It's probably best to get in touch with Mark or through the, I think there's an inquiries email as well. But again, it's probably best to put something through there, and then we can pick up on a one-to-one basis if needed. Excellent.
Well, it looks like we have picked up on the points covered, and we've covered some of the questions. Thank you. I'm glad that you found it an introduction to this, and again, as Jeremy has said, that we can pick up this offline with you if you have any further questions. You've got the email addresses there. You can also contact myself, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of other opportunities over the next few months to pick up should your projects be a little further in the future. So just want to extend a thanks both to Jeremy for taking the session and also to Mark for the introduction. If we're okay on the chat, then I think we'll bring the session to a close.
Thanks, Tracy.
Big thank you to everybody for your time this morning.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And I'll end the session now. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.